He was rejected for being poor. A blizzard and a wolf made him a legend.
The winds of Wyoming didn't just carry the scent of sagebrush, they carried the weight of a man's pride being crushed. Jack stood at the edge of a vast golden estate, his boots worn thin and his pockets lighter than the mountain air. He had come to ask for Claire's hand, fueled by nothing but a sincere heart and a promise to work until his hands bled. He loved her with a quiet intensity that only the lonely can understand. And he believed, perhaps naively, that love would be enough to bridge the gap between a laborer and a princess of the plains. But Claire's father, a man whose soul was measured in acreage and head of cattle, had laughed, a cold, dry sound that cut deeper than any winter frost. He stood on his polished mahogany porch looking down at Jack as if he were a weed in a prized garden. "Go find a life worth sharing, boy," the rancher had said, his voice echoing across the yard. "My daughter isn't for a man who owns nothing but the shadow he stands in. You want her? First, start your earning. Build a name. Then and only then, come to me for my daughter. Until then, you are nothing but a beggar at my gate."
Tell us where you're watching from. If you love these Western tales, please share and subscribe so we can bring you more.
Heartbroken and hollow, Jack didn't stay to argue. He couldn't bear to see Claire's tear-stained face through the window of the great manor, her hand pressed against the glass in a silent goodbye. He turned his horse north, crossing the border into the rugged, unforgiving territory of Montana. He wanted a place where the mountains were taller than any man's ego. A place where he could disappear into the silence of the timber and the sting of the cold. High in the Bitterroot Range, Jack built a small, sturdy cabin out of cedar logs and sheer will. He became a creature of the forest, a mountain man who spoke more to the hawks than to people. His days were spent swinging a heavy axe, the rhythmic thud of falling timber providing the soundtrack to his solitude. Every few weeks he would haul a load of seasoned logs down to the nearest settlement, trading them for his meager livelihood. It was a lonely existence, but it was honest. He lived on beans, coffee, and the memory of Claire's smile, which haunted him every time the sun dipped below the jagged peaks. One evening, as a lavender dusk settled over the peaks, Jack heard a high-pitched whimper near a frozen creek. There, caught beneath a fallen branch and shivering in the snow, was a wolf pup. Its hind leg was mangled, and its eyes were clouded with pain. Most men of that era would have reached for a rifle, seeing only a future predator. But Jack saw a mirror of his own abandonment. He saw a creature rejected by the world, left to die in the cold. He carried the pup back to his cabin, binding the broken bone with splints of pine and feeding it warm broth from a wooden spoon. He named the wolf Shadow. As the months passed, the pup grew into a powerful, silver-coated companion. Shadow became more than a pet. He became Jack's guardian against the cruelties of the wilderness. Shadow possessed an almost supernatural intuition. On several occasions, when Jack had fallen into tragedy, the wolf was his savior. Once, while cutting timber on a steep slope, a massive log shifted unexpectedly, pinning Jack's leg and threatening to crush him. He was miles from help, and the sun was setting. Shadow had not only stayed by his side to keep him warm, but had eventually dug the earth out from under the log with such ferocity that Jack was able to slide his leg free. Another time, Jack had fallen through a thin patch of ice into a frigid mountain stream. The shock of the water had stolen his breath, paralyzing his limbs. Shadow had lunged into the water, gripping Jack's heavy buffalo skin coat in his powerful jaws, and dragging him to the bank, then barking incessantly, until Jack regained enough consciousness to crawl back to the cabin. Each time tragedy struck, the wolf was there to pull him back from the brink, cementing a bond of life debt between man and beast. The winter arrived with a ferocity that erased the horizon. A relentless blizzard descended, turning the world into a spinning vortex of ice. The wind howled through the chinks in the cabin walls like a chorus of ghosts. Locked in his cabin, Jack felt Shadow grow restless. The wolf paced the floor, his ears pricked toward the mountain pass. Suddenly, Shadow began to howl, not at the moon, but toward the dark, swirling heart of the storm. It was a mournful, urgent sound that signaled a tragedy in progress. Trusting Shadow's instincts, Jack bundled himself in heavy furs, hitched a crude heavy sledge to his strongest horse, and followed the wolf into the screaming white wind. They traveled for hours, the snow blinding and the cold biting through layers of wool. Finally, Shadow stopped and began to dig frantically near a snowbank. Jack found the wreckage of a massive cattle drive caught in the pass. It was a scene of quiet devastation. Wagons were overturned and buried in drifts that rose 10 feet high. People were fainted in the snow, their bodies beginning to be claimed by the frost. Cattle were lost, wandering blindly or frozen where they stood. Amidst the chaos, Jack found an old man lying partially buried near the lead wagon. He was grunting faintly, his face as pale as the drifts around him. Jack immediately sprang into action. Since the stranger was too weak to stand and couldn't walk, Jack used his immense strength to hoist him onto the sledge. He gathered as many other survivors as he could find, piling them onto the cart and wrapping them in the extra blankets he had brought. Guided through the blinding white by Shadow's unerring sense of direction, Jack fought the storm for hours until the faint light of his cabin appeared through the haze. For 5 days Jack worked tirelessly. He burned through his entire winter woodpile to keep the hearth roaring, creating a wall of heat against the Montana frost. He nursed the old man, feeding him melted snow and warm gruel, watching as the color slowly returned to the stranger's weathered cheeks. Jack slept on the floor, giving his bed to the survivors, while Shadow kept watch at the door. On the 6th day, when the old man was finally stable and the others had begun to regain their strength, the skies cleared. The world was a pristine, silent white. Jack was outside splitting a few remaining logs to keep the fire going when he saw his cabin being surrounded by a group of tough-looking riders. They were armed and weary, their eyes darting with suspicion. Jack didn't understand why this was happening until one man knocked at the door with the butt of his rifle. As Jack opened the door, the men surged forward and seized him. "We've got him!" the leader shouted. "You're under arrest, boy. You're the kidnapper who snatched the boss from the trail." Jack struggled, confused and exhausted. "I didn't kidnap anyone. I saved them from the blizzard." The men didn't listen, pinning Jack against the rough logs of his cabin. Just as the situation turned dire, the old man intervened. He stepped to the door, leaning heavily on a cane. Jack had carved for him out of hickory. "Let him go!" the old man barked, his voice regaining its command. "This man didn't kidnap me. He is the only reason any of us are breathing. He pulled me from a frozen grave while you lot were huddled in the valley waiting for the sun." The riders fell silent, their faces flushing with shame as they lowered their weapons. The old man turned to Jack, his eyes shining with a profound respect. He revealed himself to be Silas Vance, a legendary figure in the West, a very rich rancher with vast holdings in both Montana and Wyoming. Silas was moved by Jack's selflessness, his tireless work ethic, and the loyalty of the silver wolf that stood protectively at Jack's heel. To repay the debt of his life, Silas made Jack an offer that changed everything. He appointed Jack as the general manager of every Vance ranch across both territories. The salary was as much as Jack could take, a fortune that would make him one of the most powerful men in the region. Jack accepted, not for the greed of gold, but for the chance to finally be the man Clara's father demanded he become. Months passed, the spring thaw came, and Jack returned to Wyoming, but not as the penniless boy who had left. He was now a man of substance, overseeing thousands of head of cattle and hundreds of employees. He sat on the porch of a grand ranch house on the Vance estate, Shadow sitting regally at his side, the wolf's silver fur shimmering in the afternoon sun. A dusty carriage pulled into the yard, and an older man stepped out. It was Clara's father. Time had not been kind to him. His estate was struggling, and his face was lined with the stress of a failing legacy. He had come to the famous Vance ranch to buy a nice horse, hoping to improve his stock and save his business. Jack happened to be at a distant ranch checking the fences that morning. When the old man approached the office, the staff told him, "I cannot give you any horse today. Our manager is out on the range. When the manager returns, he will give you the price and the papers." The man waited for hours, pacing the porch. When Jack finally rode into the yard on a magnificent black stallion, his silhouette framed by the setting sun, Claire's father froze in shock. He was stunned to see the poor man he had once rejected now standing in such a high post. He saw the way the cowboys looked at Jack with respect, and he saw the magnificent wolf that trotted beside him. The old man realized in that moment that he had been blind. He had looked at Jack's empty pockets and missed the fact that the young man was a real gem, a hard-working, kind, and resilient soul who was worth more than all the gold in the hills. He felt a deep, biting regret for the way he had treated him. "Jack," the man whispered, his voice trembling as he stepped forward. "Is it truly you?" Jack dismounted, his expression calm. "It's me, sir. I've started my earning, just as you asked." The old man bowed his head, unable to look Jack in the eye. "I was a fool. I see now that character is the only true wealth. You are a better man than I ever gave you credit for." Jack's heart beat fast as he asked the only question that mattered. "And what of your daughter? What of Clara?" The father's face crumbled and he began to cry, heavy, soulful tears of sorrow. "Oh, Jack, I did her a great wrong. After you left, I pressured her into a marriage with a wealthy merchant, thinking I was securing her future. But it was a loveless match. Last spring, a fever swept through the town. Her husband was taken by it. She is a widow now, living in a small cottage on my land, mourning the life she should have had." Jack didn't feel triumph at the news, only a profound sense of urgency. He didn't care about her status or the tragedy of the past. He cared only for the woman who had held his heart in a mountain cabin for all those months. "I will marry her," Jack said firmly, his voice ringing with conviction. "I loved her when I had nothing, and I love her now that I have everything." Hearing this, the father started crying even harder, overwhelmed by Jack's mercy and his unwavering devotion. He realized that Jack was not just a successful manager. He was a man of extraordinary grace. Jack rode to the cottage that evening. When Clara saw him standing in the doorway, the light of the setting sun behind him, and shadow by his side, she felt as though a dream had finally come to life. They were married in a beautiful ceremony on the ranch, a celebration that the entire territory talked about for years. They lived a long and happy life together, a testament to the fact that while the winter may be cold and the world may be harsh, a kind heart and a faithful companion can weather any storm.
If you enjoy our Western stories, consider subscribing. It really helps us keep creating more for you.